Bon après-midi tout le monde! Bienvenue à une séance toute spéciale de l'ACAF qu'on fait sur la gestion de performance. Mon nom est Dany Richard, président pour l'ACAF. Très heureux d'être avec vous aujourd'hui. I do these every year. We try to do these because it's the time of year where performance assessments are going to be happening. And I'm not alone, right? Like you, I'm an ACFO member. I know a lot about PMAs, but I'd like to have our labor relations advisors with us today. And today we have Grant Bolin. Hello, Grant.
Hi, everybody. Pleasure to be here with you on a cold day here in Ottawa. And Dany was just reminding me that it was around about a year ago that we did the same topic again. And I imagine we'll have some similar questions, but we look forward to answering them.
Thanks, Grant. Pleasure to have you here. Grant is one of our labor relations advisors. When you contact us at ACFO, these are the people you'll be speaking to, so it's good to have some exposure to see the people you'll be dealing with. If you were with us last year when we did this session, the deck is pretty similar, but we've added some stats for you guys, which I think you're going to enjoy. It gives you the bell curve of what kind of performance assessments are out there in terms of the ratings. I think you're going to enjoy that one. So what is the purpose today? Really, guys, we're going to give you some tips and tricks, our advice of when it comes to performance management agreements, do's and don'ts, what you should be looking into. As usual, we're going to take your questions. So the way we take your questions, via Slido. Slido's the best. So you go on the Slido website, slido.com. You ask us a question there, and I see we already have some questions. That's great. So it's going to ask you for a code. You put in your code, which is ACFO-ACAF. So everything you can see on the screen right now, this is the way you can actually ask us your questions. Completely anonymous. You can vote the questions up. Écrivez vos questions en français, il n'y a pas de problème. La présentation qu'on va faire aujourd'hui, le deck est en anglais parce qu'on ne peut pas partager deux écrans en même temps. On l'a scellé, ça ne fonctionne pas très bien. La bonne nouvelle, par contre, c'est que suite à cette web diffusion, demain ou après-demain, l'information sera sur notre site web. Donc, vous allez pouvoir revoir cette distribution et le deck qu'on va vous montrer, voir la version française également. Fait que posez vos questions en français, il n'y a pas de problème. We're going to be taking questions maybe in about half an hour. So we're going to go through the deck, give you some useful information on that, and then we'll go into the Q&A portion. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them there. We'll get to them in about 30 minutes. So let's get to the deck. We're talking about performance management agreements. Why are we talking about this? I will tell you, friends, my home department's at PSPC. When I started in 2006, a little secret between you and I, no one cared about PMAs. They had no impact whatsoever. If you were great, so what? You didn't get a more wage increase. You didn't get better opportunities. And if you're not so great, didn't change anything. So it was very clearly a paper exercise. Nowadays, however, there are a couple of reasons. I mean, three reasons you should pay attention to your PMAs. The first one is if you are tagged as Succeed Plus, you're probably going to get a talent management plan, which is great. Like you're being lined up for a promotion eventually. So you want to make sure you highlight your value to the employer. So you want to make sure you're on there. But the opposite is also true. If you're having some performance issues and you're a Succeed minus, well, in that case, you're probably going to have an action plan to bring you up to speed to where your performance should be. I think the last reason you should pay attention is, I talked about career progression. Your future employer, could it be your current department or another department, has the right to access your PMA. And a lot of you don't know this. The employer has a right to go and get your performance assessment without even asking for you. Now, generally speaking, if they do get it, they're going to ask you for full transparency, but they don't know to remember the PMA does not belong to you. It is an employer document. It is something that belongs to them. So they have the right to go and pull that off. So you want to make sure that it properly reflects your performance. Now, throughout this conversation, I'm going to talk about some terms. I just want to recap this. So as you know, there's a scale from 1 to 5 in the government. 1 is you're unable to achieve or assess. 2 is Succeed minus, so it's like you're not really there. 3 is a Succeed, so you're okay, not great, not poor, just you did what you need to. 4 is a Succeed plus, and 5 is a Surpass. And we'll get to that grid a little bit later on in this deck. But really, most people get a Succeed, a 3. It's the easiest one to get. That's what you just put them in there, and that's fine. But there is sometimes a Succeed plus or Succeed minus that's gonna be needing some more legwork to actually document that. So maybe we can go to the first page of this deck, and we're going to tell you what are your rights. When it comes to a PMA, what are your rights? So you have a right to be given a copy of your PMA to review it. So we can't just do a table drop and say, by the way, I'm going to tell you your assessment here, and you never knew what the what the objectives were, what you were supposed to do. You have a right to know in writing what these are. The person that's going to be doing your performance assessment, observing your behavior, has to be there for at least half of the period being observed. So say you're being assessed for 6 months. Well, the person doing your assessment doesn't have to be, you don't have to be their employee for the full 6 months. If you're there for 4 months, they can still assess your behavior. This is something we often get a question on. I mentioned your comments need to be written down and be given an opportunity to sign it. We get this question a lot, and Grant, I'll throw it to you in a minute here if you have something to add on this one. But you have to go ahead and question, do I have to sign my PMA? The answer is yes. You have to sign. You're signing that you acknowledge receipt of your PMA. You're not signing that you agree to it. You're not signing saying this. No, you're only saying that I've received a copy of it and I sign it. We'll talk about this later on. There is a box, a section of your PMA that you can actually put your specific comments, and you want to make sure you do that because that's where you reflect about what you agree or disagree about your PMA. Grant, anything to add on this particular slide?
Yeah, I mean, just on the second bullet, sometimes we get questions about who is the person doing the evaluation, and I probably should clarify that it doesn't need to be your direct supervisor. The wording in there is kind of important, been aware of your performance. So the person doing the evaluation doesn't necessarily have to have been like directly supervising you during that period. They could be, you know, possibly they could have been a level above. They could even be off to the side as well too, because that wording is fairly vague there. Been aware of your performance, so they don't have to have been directly supervising you for that period. Thank you, Grant.
If we go to the next slide, it's things you should know. So obviously, why are we talking about this right now? If you're an ACFO member, you're going to be doing your performance assessment probably sometime in April after the year end. We all know how this works, right? Someone tells you, okay, you've got to do your PMA now. And let's be honest, I don't think anyone likes doing their assessments, not as an employee or as a manager. Something it's fun. It's time consuming. It's a paper exercise. It needs to be done, though. It needs to get done. So what do you need to know? Should be an ongoing dialogue. So you should never be surprised. Like, I know there's twice a year where you have to midway you do an assessment, and then at the end of the year, you're actually going to have the final one. But it should be an ongoing conversation. If at mid-year you believe you're on track to meet your objectives, and your boss tells you, wow, Dany, you're really not hitting the mark here. You're going to have to really change what you're doing, and it comes as a surprise. Well, that's not normal. There's 2 times that you are forced to actually write it down in checkbox, but you should have feedback in real time. So if today I had, for some reason, I don't know, I messed up a report or an email I sent contained an inappropriate tone, if Grant is my manager, he needs to let me know as soon as possible, not 3 or 4 months later, because you can't correct something you're not aware of. It's simply not fair to you as an employee. So it should always be a constant dialogue. If anytime you have a mid-year review or a year-end assessment and you're surprised, it's probably because you didn't have that ongoing dialogue. And that's why it's so important to have that dialogue. I've mentioned this before, where if you have a Succeed Plus, so if you have a 4, it should lead to some type of talent management. Now, that doesn't mean that it's a guaranteed promotion, but it definitely sets you up to potentially have a promotion further down the road. That's why it's so important to try to make sure you get the full value recognized. Succeed minus rating can lead to an action plan. Ça, j'en ai parlé, c'est que si les objectifs que vous faites ne sont pas atteints, ben, à un moment donné, l'employeur, lui, il faut qu'il vraiment vienne corriger le comportement ou les actions qui sont prises. Parce que vous avez le droit d'avoir une réussite qui est possible. Tu sais, si quelqu'un vous donne des objectifs qui sont complètement tordus, c'est certain que vous ne serez pas en mesure de réussir. Donc, si l'employeur remarque que votre performance n'est pas vraiment à point, on doit vous donner les outils que vous avez besoin pour réussir. I've mentioned this. Management is using PMAs more freely as a tool in staffing process. This gets more challenging, friends, right? So I'll give you an example. If, for some reason, Grant is my manager, and Grant and I don't get along, not because we're bad people, but his management style versus my style that I prefer to be managed, it's not the same style. So maybe we had buds every time in a while. That doesn't mean that I'm a bad employee. So say I want to get deployed somewhere else. Well, that person's probably going to ask me for a reference, and my reference is going to be Grant. And Grant might say, you know, Danny's a decent employee, right? I think sometimes we don't see eye to eye on certain things, and he's not giving me a bad reference, but he's not giving me a glowing reference either. So you've got to be aware that even though you might not always see eye to people, remember your supervisor at some point is probably going to have some input in your future reference. I'm not saying that's fair, but that's the way it is right now. So often your soft skills, your ability to maneuver in the minefield is something that's going to be very helpful for you in your PMAs. So you want to make sure that you're getting your points across, but it's often how you say things that is most important. It's not necessarily what you're saying, but how you say it. So keep it in mind that your future boss might want to pull out that PMA. So make sure that you always have a professional tone in that PMA. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Your PMA should be based on the SMART objectives. I think you've seen those, and we'll talk about them in the next slide. But Grant, anything you'd like to add on this particular slide?
Yeah, a couple thoughts here on, well, first of all, in labor relations, we do end up talking to members that have a succeeded minus and are going on action plans. And I think it's probably important for everybody to know statistically the odds are very, very small that somebody would be terminated or even demoted for poor performance. In my more than 15 years at ACFO, there's less than a handful of employees, but that doesn't mean that it's not important and important to deal with and talk through. And I think that if I would just encourage anybody who does get a succeeded minus to contact labor relations here, because the details of how management approaches things going forward and through an action plan should be reviewed, I think, by ACFO, and they don't always get that part right, I would say, in management, because they're not familiar with dealing with action plans. They're not often familiar with dealing with performance-related issues and addressing them. So we are here to help you guys in that regard if that comes up. And then I'll have a few more thoughts, but maybe I'll save them for whatever questions come up later on.
Thanks, Grant. We'll talk about quickly about the SMART objectives. This one is tricky, friends, okay? So typically departments, what they do is they have their departmental objectives, right? You'll see things like ethics and code of conduct you need to abide by. You'll have common themes throughout all employees and then specific to your team. And then what you see afterwards is that you have your specific ones that are specific to you, which could be just maybe one or two of those. So, and Laura, maybe we can go to these SMART objectives on the screen. So it has to be something that is specific, right? So you need to know exactly what's going to be measured. And whenever you're looking at the beginning of the year, so I know in a couple of months, you're going to be doing your year-end assessment, but at the same time, you're doing your 2021, 2022 objectives. So you always have to look at this, look at it through this lens. You have to ask yourself, at the end of the year, could any of these be used against me? I'm not saying the employer is against you, absolutely not. But just think of this, is this specific? Is it something that I actually understand, right? You know your job, typically speaking, you know your job better than anybody else. So is this something that you feel you understand what's being measured here? How is it being measured? So if I say, I'll give you the example I always use. If you're in your PMA, it says you need to be able to brief up, you need to be able to do proper one-pagers, briefing documents. Okay, well, how is that going to be measured? It's going to be measured by who? By my superior, by my client, by my colleagues, and it's very subjective. What is a clear one? What I think is clear might not be clear to you. Is it quantifiable or is it quality we're looking for? So look at it through that lens. Is it measurable? Okay, well, I need to file my financial statements within 30 days. Okay, 30 days, that's pretty easy to follow, right? But sometimes it's not easy to measure. So ask yourself, is this measurable? Is this something that's really specific to me? I know, knowing what job I do, is this something that's audience specific? Is it realistic? If I'm supposed to be doing, I don't know, 20 financial statements per month and I'm being asked to do 100 and I know that's completely unrealistic, you have to flag that because you have to be set up to succeed, not something that's completely inaccurate and unattainable. And is it time bound? Is it something that it's achievable within a certain time frame? Now, I say all this, friends, right? That's the theory of it, okay? But you've got to be careful. I've seen this happen where someone is deployed to another team, to another department. And on day one, say I start was March 15, and I go see my manager and I say, look, I really want to make sure I attain your goals that you've set to me. So day one, can you please redo my assessment in terms of what are my SMART objectives? I want them to be specific, measurable, audience specific, realistic, and time bound. That's the theory of it. And you have a right to get that. But let's look at what happened with COVID. If you look at 2020 and 2021, the majority of you probably signed your PMAs at the beginning of the year, like, I don't know, July or August. So you almost had half the year done and you still didn't know what your objectives were, right? So is the PMA process a formal protocol? It is, but your ability to navigate through the formal process with your soft skills is how you're going to make a name for yourself, right? No one wants to have an employee that's going to be nitpicking at every word. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't challenge if need be, but it's how you're challenging. You want to make sure that you make it easy for your supervisor, because keep in mind, whoever's managing you, they probably have more than one employee. So for everything that they do for you, they're going to have to reproduce to someone else. So make sure that you're making it easy for them. Help them. Write down what you think they should be your performance objectives. And if it makes sense, I'll say, hey, you know what? Thanks for that. It actually makes it easier for me. So as I know that, Grant, I'll let you comment on the SMART objectives, that it should always be SMART and you have a right to that, but you got to be careful how you bring that forward. Grant, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to hit on what you just said. So what I'll do is highlight again, like what you just said in terms of like the employee's role in this process. And really, it's that using those soft skills in most cases. Managers. You now have as much knowledge about SMART objectives as your manager. So you have to be part of that process and guiding and helping them to put those in for what you will be rated on. So whether you end up being rated as a 2, 3, 4, these objectives are important. So it's worth putting a little bit of time and using some of your energy into making sure that they are as good as they can be. And obviously related to your position and flexible enough, as Dany mentioned, to be able to adapt them. Dany?
Thanks, Grant. We'll hit some numbers here on the next slide. And friends, you can take a picture of this one. But again, this deck will be on our website today or tomorrow, probably tomorrow or by the end of the week. We're going to have this presentation both in English and in French. That's going to be on our website. Ici, ce que vous voyez vraiment, c'est une distribution typique pour un ministère. OK? C'est pas tout pareil de ministère à ministère, là, mais voici comment une distribution normale de la courbe d'évaluation de performance de rendement. Comme vous pouvez voir, 70% des gens, typiquement, là, sont un 3, là, un succeed, un réussi. Quand vous avez un réussi, plus ou moins, il n'y a rien qui arrive. Vous avez réussi, tant mieux. Donc, ça vous protège parce que si jamais l'employeur il dit, écoute, Grant Bolin, ça fait 3 ans qu'il ne performe pas, ben nous, comme syndicat, on va voir l'évaluation de performance et on va dire, mais je m'excuse, ça fait 3 ans qu'on dit qu'il y a un réussi, fait que je ne vois pas il y a où le problème. Là. But on the other side, I was mentioning, if you have a succeed minus, which is a 2, or a succeed plus, which is a 4, there's going to be actions there. So, you might be asking yourself, well, I've heard that there are specific objectives given to the executives, right? You can't have more than X amount. That is garbage, okay? If they're in a team, there could be 5 people that should be surpassed, okay? Now, I'm not saying that's likely to happen, but if it could happen, if the 5 people in one team completely off the chart in terms of their performance, they surpassed any possible expectations we had for them. The employer, if they were to come back and say, I'm sorry, we can't have 5 people on the same team rated a 5, a surpass. It's just not going to work. Well, that's where we're going to have to push back here and say, I'm sorry. Here's why I believe I deserved a succeed plus or a surpassed. The numbers I've given you here, this is just a typical distribution. This is what overall, from a departmental standpoint, what the distribution typically looks like. But if someone tells you, hey, I was going to give you a succeed plus of a 4, but I'm going to give you a 3 simply because we've reached our cap of how many people can have a succeed plus. That is garbage. I'm not saying that they weren't told this. What I'm saying is that you deserve a proper performance assessment. And if you have a succeed plus, you should be given a succeed plus. You should not be prevented from getting the rating that you need simply because someone said, we've got too many people that are in succeed plus, so we're gonna have to give you a 3. But the opposite is also true. If you're a succeed minus, if you're someone that's struggling, and your manager knows that, well, if I give you a 2, that's a succeed minus, I'm gonna have to build a very big business case. I'm gonna have to do an action plan. I don't wanna do this. I'm just gonna give this person a 3. It's much easier. Well, that's not helping you out because you need to be able to identify if you're having issues, because you don't want to be surprised at the year end. You know, if I give you a 3 at mid-year review, which is succeed, and at the end of the year I give you a 2, which is succeed minus, and you're like, where's this coming from? I thought I was on track to meet my objectives, right? So what I'm trying to say is you got to build your own case here. It should never be a surprise. And if you think you're a 4, a succeed plus, build that case for your manager throughout the year. Keep note of when someone said, amazing job, you know what, you really knocked this one out of the park. Great, document that so you can, at the end of the year, it's already documented all the things that you did that you believe is a succeed plus. So these are the stats. It's not an exact science, right? You know, the succeed one year might be 65, the other year might be 75. The reason why I'm showing you this chart is for you guys to understand that there's going to be a bell curve regardless of the department, but there's no such thing as telling someone we can't give you a succeed plus because we've reached our cap for this year, for example, for our team. That is simply BS. If that's the case, contact us because we can maybe coach you on how to write that email to make sure you're given full credit, because I'm telling you, friends, we need to give full credit where credit is due. PMAs are more and more important. Grant, any comments on this one?
Yeah, a couple things on maybe towards for the 2 there. I think you made a really good point there, Dany, with respect to managers' reluctance to address performance issues, which is, like, I would say, like, culturally has been a problem in the federal public service, and one of the reasons why they brought in the directive. And it's really because it's not, if you get succeeded minus and if you are put on an action plan, that is really not solely on you to address. It's not solely your responsibility. There's obligations on the part of management at that point to provide training, to provide mentorship, to provide to help you to get to that level. So they should not be skirting their obligations to do that simply by giving people 3s and then moving, you know, just continuing poor performance. And then maybe on the unable to assess, because some members might want to understand about that. That's often used for when people might be on like a long-term leave without pay. They just entered into a new position, unable to assess for that reason. There's a variety of, that's kind of a catch-all for different reasons why it's not appropriate to rate somebody for that particular year. Dany?
Thanks for pointing that out, Grant. I think it's a good point. Even if you're a new employee, right? If you've just been starting for 2 months, it's too soon to be able to assess your performance. So, and I've mentioned this, guys, it's not an exact science. I mean, depending on your manager, you could have the same employee assessed by 3 different people, and those 3 people could assess you in 2 different ways, right? My advice to you guys is, what do you think your performance is, right? And it's challenging because I have seen this. I have seen where you believe that you should be a succeed, a 3. But your coworker, who is, you believe, in your opinion, a succeed minus, that's a 2, is given a 3. So, and you're left to say, wait a second here. I'm not sure what the exact definitions of these grids are, but I do know that, for example, if I think I'm twice as good as Grant and Grant received a 3, well, I should receive a 4 because, you know, Grant is not the best employee of this team. So what happened there? Perhaps that Grant's manager did not want to give Grant a succeed minus, because anytime you don't give someone a 3, you're going to have to, it's going to be a lot more work. If you're doing a 2 or a 4, it's a lot more documentation. So maybe it's year end, everyone's busy. We're just going to give Grant a 3 like everybody else. well, it's not giving credit where credit is due. So if you're a manager watching this, make sure that you're giving proper due or proper feedback where it needs to get done, because otherwise it does create that sense of unfairness in the team. And look, I've done my fair share of performance assessment when I was PSPC, and it is time consuming, but get your employees to help you with that. And Lauren, maybe we can touch on this on the next slide here. So what are you going to do at the beginning of the year? At the beginning of the year, make sure you understand and agree with what will be measured. If you're given something that you feel is unfair, doesn't reflect your duties, is unattainable, unmeasurable, be delicate in how you flag it, but definitely flag it. Because once you've agreed to your performance, agreed to your objectives, it's very difficult to then backtrack and say, well, I realize now that I didn't realize 10 months ago is this was not properly worded. I think this is unattainable. So give it fair process to ensure that you're on board with the plan is. Clarify, discuss your goals, make sure it's on the same page. Now, at the mid-year, review it. And throughout the year, friends, make sure that you always keep in the back of your mind, whenever you hear something good, just document it. I'm not saying present that, at the end of the year, I wouldn't say, here's 17 emails and give that to your boss and say, hey, look how great job I did. My number one thing to you is use a PMA as your opportunity to shine. And I will tell you what works often, I hear this time and time again, is have a conversation with your boss and say, hey, you know what? For example, now it's March 15th, right? Some of you got to do these by April 15th. I would suggest to your boss saying, hey, you mind if I take a first kick at my PMA? Just maybe do the legwork for you, and then you can review it, right? Ask your boss if you can make their life easier, because no one knows your performance better than yourself. And take a big, hard look. Give yourself full credit where credit is due, but also if there's areas of improvement, make sure you highlight that, because you're showing your supervisor that you're able to provide feedback and do a hard assessment of yourself. And I think your supervisor will really appreciate that, because if you highlight areas that you know are deficiencies, it makes it much more easier for your boss to have that conversation with you, but also it shows your professionalism that you don't have a biased opinion towards yourself. He's much more likely to give you that positive feedback or the retroactive that needs a bit more improvement there. So make sure you have that conversation there. And also for me, friends, I used to love it when people do all the legwork, because I often forget, remember, if you're managing 5 people, 10 people, you lose track throughout the year of what's happening. But when those are clearly outlined in point form, it's much easier as supervisor to say, oh, you know what? Right. Oh, you're building your own case to get that 4. If you feel you deserve a 4, if you deserve a 3, then build your case to deserve the 3. I know a lot of people will say, well, it's not my job, right? It's their job. And you're right. You can play that way. But I would much rather have a say in my performance agreement and proposing what I think my strengths and my weaknesses are, because this way you kind of control the narrative. And that's what you want to do. You really know what's going on there. Grant, anything to add on this one?
Yeah, I mean, just on your last point there, I mean, that's what initiative is, and that's something which, really should be evaluated for any employee as well, is sort of taking that first step to do your own self-analysis. So self-reflection is another huge skill that will help anybody, whether you've received a 2, a 3, or a 4, to really improve yourself going forward. So I think the reality is that performance appraisals, this is going to be part of all of our futures going forward through the rest of our careers. So let's take advantage of them. And one of the good things that they do offer is that moment of self-reflection. So taking that time to look at and really take an honest look at what your pros and your cons are, and that will help you to address and perform better. Dany?
Thanks, Grant. I'll give you, and Lauren, we can go to the next slide here. I'll give you my tip, friends, okay? What I've seen works best is at your mid-year review, ask your boss, is there anything you see areas of improvement, things I should be working on? The reason why you ask this is you're kind of setting yourself up for success at the end of the year. If your boss says, I don't see any area of improvement, then at the end of the year, you should probably get at least a 3. But also, when you're going to apply for another job, you're almost guaranteeing a positive reference, because if you don't have any area of improvement, then probably you're ready for a promotion or a lateral move, right? So asking that question really allows you to plant the way towards a positive future with your career, because if there's no areas of improvement, then obviously the next logical choice is probably I can move on or continue to do bigger and bigger things. how do you achieve the 4, right? I've gotten this question before where at the beginning of the year, I'm given my objectives, and then I ask my boss, so this is to get a 3, right? A succeed. What do I need to do to get a 4, a succeed plus? What do I need to do to get a surplus, a 5? And unfortunately, it's not an exact science, right? There are certain jobs, honestly, where I think it's going to be very difficult to get a surpass or even a succeed plus. But what I find works well, friends, is 3 things. Have a positive attitude, okay? Which is sometimes very difficult. It's easy to have a positive attitude when things are going well, right? But having a positive attitude when things are not going so great, I'm not saying be a suck up here or a brown noser. No, what I'm saying is even when things are difficult, there's a way to say things, constructive criticism, be careful how you say them to ensure that you're perceived as a professional. Perception is reality. You know, when I'm going on behalf of ACFO on all these meetings, I always make sure I'm turn my camera on. Why? Because I want to market myself as a professional. I make sure I look good. The lighting is why? Because whenever people think of us, of ACFO, I want them to think of professionals. Your career is the same thing. Positive attitude, someone who's professional, because it only takes one outburst to ruin your credibility, ruin your reputation. When people think of you, they want to think of someone who's there. Yes, I remember this person. They're always well thought out. They got professional comments, positive attitudes. That's my first thing. The second thing is add value. And what I mean by add value is solve problems, not just your problems. Solve your boss's problems, solve your coworkers' problems, solve your clients' problems. When you're helping people solve their problems, they're much more likely to see you as a problem fixer. They want you on their team. They're more likely to give you a succeed plus because they see you as an invaluable member of their team. So I know we all have our problems, right? If I'm sure I go out to any of you and I say, what problems are you facing at work? I'm sure you can list off plenty of problems. And your boss is the same thing. But instead of having your problems get dumped on your boss, how about you try to resolve their problems to your best availability and try to solve some of their problems? That's how you get to the succeed plus. You're going above and beyond. You're not just doing your job, but you're trying to do what you can do to help others. And the third one is being a team player. Being a teamwork helps a lot. Look, at ACFO, we have just a limited number of resources, but we never say no to help out another union, to help out the employer, to where we can, because we know when you build those relationships, build that credibility of being a helper, when you need a favor, when you need something to be done, people are much more likely to help you when you've helped them already. So be positive, solve problems, and be a team player. And I guarantee you at some point, you're going to get to that succeed plus. I know that a lot of you think you deserve it, and you probably do. But sometimes it's difficult to get to that level if your manager doesn't really see you as that succeed plus yet, even though you probably deserve it. So best practices, going back to the deck. Maintain an ongoing dialogue, of course, durant toute l'année. Écoute, j'en reviens pas, les amis, là, que ça arrive des fois, ça. Grant peut vous en parler, là, nos conseillers en relations de travail. Quand vous vous attendez à recevoir un 3, puis vous recevez un 2, ça arrive encore. Ça ne devrait jamais être le cas. La personne là, devrait avoir une très bonne idée de ça va être quoi la performance qu'elle va avoir durant l'année. C'est toujours comme ça. Mais non, même aujourd'hui, je pense que ça doit faire 5-6 ans qu'on a changé ça, puis il y a encore des personnes qui se font surprendre avec leur évaluation de rendement. Posez vos questions au courant de l'année. Comment est-ce que vous pensez que ma performance? Y a-t-il des choses que je peux améliorer? Quand vous posez la question à l'employeur, là, c'est beaucoup plus facile à la personne de s'ouvrir à vous. Parce que quand vous n'êtes pas au courant, c'est difficile ça, mais quand vous donnez l'opportunité, ça démontre un professionnalisme, ça démontre que vous voulez vous améliorer. Use your comment box wisely. I cannot emphasize this enough, friends, okay? And I know we're going to get questions on Slido here in a couple of minutes. The employer has their comment box. They can write whatever they want. They could do a completely inaccurate representation of what they think you did during the year. That's their box. You can't touch that. You can, in your box, you can say whatever you want, right? So the employer could say, we believe Dany Richard is a sub-performing employee. He always misses his deadlines and his coworkers really despise him, right? Which I would never recommend someone write in that fashion, but let's say they did. Well, in my box, I would do what I think my performance was, right? I'm happy to be part of this team. Here's what I thought I brought to the table. And then you list, right? What you don't want to see, friends, is, I'm just going to say it, a bitching fest, right? You don't want to see blah, 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 negative, negative, negative. Oh yeah, well, you suck, you suck, you suck. Because here's what happens. There's going to be an argument here, right? We clearly don't agree about what the performance was. And that's going to get escalated up the food chain. And once it gets escalated, the people that are reading this, they don't know anyone here. They don't know the supervisor. They don't know you. What happens is they look at the boxes themselves. Who is writing in a professional tone, a professional email, versus who's one that seems to be attacking the other person, right? So even if you don't agree with what the employer said, in your box, you can say what you think you bring to the table. And you can comment to what the employer said, but that's a very delicate dance. I would recommend you guys, if you have disagreements with what the employer is saying on their box, contact us at ACFO so we can maybe help you write the right tone of that box, because your future employer, they're going to see that box as well. And if they see you just going at it saying, I think my manager is an idiot, he doesn't give me a proper due, or it just doesn't look good on anybody. So be very careful with your comment box. Always be professional, I beg of you. Keep records of successes. We mentioned this, and take ownership of your learning. After your learning plan, we can talk about that as well. But Grant, any comments there on that comment box? I know we get a lot of questions on that.
Oh, I mean, I definitely wanted to talk about that because, well, one of the things we have gotten past the halfway mark here, and we haven't talked about grievances at all. And one of the reasons we haven't talked about it is because a grievance, it's very difficult to grieve. I'll just say it right to the largest audience I can. Very difficult to grieve what's in a performance appraisal. It says right in the collective agreement what your mechanism is if you don't agree with it. It says that you have the right to attach your comments and put them in the comment box. So I'll give you a really brief explanation of how this works, and if you have any questions afterwards, you can, or if you have any clarification you need, you can contact me. But there's two different types of grievances that in the federal public service. So there is what I'll call adjudicable grievances, which is there's a third party, the Federal Public Service Labor Relations and Employment Board, which is a third party which hears grievances that are related to collective agreement violations. And they also hear grievances related to if you've been suspended or terminated. And then there's what we sometimes call staff relations grievances, which are grievances which just run their way up through the various levels of the department. So the three levels within the department. So a grievance that can go to the Federal Public Service Labor Relations and Employment Board obviously has a lot more leverage because there's a third party ultimately that will hear it, and not just different higher levels of management within the department. So you could file a grievance related to performance appraisal, but only if it was related to what's written in the collective agreement, what Dany talked about in terms of rights at the beginning. Like, what did this person actually review? You know, were they aware of your performance for at least half the time period? That is an example. Did you have the opportunity to read it? But you can't file an adjudicable grievance about what the content is. If they say, for example, that you are a bad employee and you did this and you did that, even if it's wrong what they have written, it's not adjudicable and it wouldn't be heard. It would just be heard within the department. Not as much leverage for that kind of grievance. So our mechanisms challenging, unless it's something that is discriminatory, let's say, and that's included in there, your mechanisms for filing grievance are going to be fairly limited. What you do have is that comment box. And I've always been of the belief that if a manager, and I do see this, frankly, relatively frequently, that managers use the performance appraisal as an opportunity to punish somebody for what is actually a workplace conflict, let's say. And they do a very poor job. I see a lot of very poorly written performance appraisals in which the manager has like very, like 2-sentence, not providing any examples, no areas, no ways for the employee to improve. And I have always been of the belief that if you put in detailed professional comments into that comment box, that any person in the future, any third party, any future hiring manager, anybody who sees something that is like non-professional versus an employee who's taken the time to address all of the concerns in a professional mechanism, that they're going to be able to see what's really happening, and they're going to have they can judge that for themselves. So Danny's right. That comment, that their box is their box. They're going to write what they want to write in it to a degree. Obviously, there's going to be a limit, which you should talk to ACFO about. But it's really in your box that you want to show what that you're open to criticism, that you're open to improving, but also what the reality of the situation is if you actually did have a good year and you actually did perform well.
Merci, Grant. Les amis, je vous le dis, là, tu sais, ça me fait rire des fois quand je vois les gens qui vont en entrevue, puis là, ils disent, écoute, je m'en vais en entrevue, je pense que c'est le temps là, que je chaîne. Je vais vraiment me faire valoir. Vous êtes toujours en entrevue. Votre carrière est une entrevue. La façon que vous interagissez avec les autres, la façon que vous vous présentez, les gens vont se faire une idée de vous. Moi, là, la raison pour laquelle j'adore les évaluations de rendement, c'est parce que, un, ça me protège en tant qu'employé. Moi, je sais que si j'ai au moins un 3, il n'y a personne qui peut revenir par en arrière pour la suite pour dire que je ne performe pas. Ben non. Écoute, ça fait 3 ans que j'ai les 3, fait on s'entend-tu que je performe quand même? La deuxième raison, c'est parce que ça me permet de formellement documenter que je performe très bien. Puis moi, je veux cette opportunité-là pour aller me documenter, pour dire que je performe bien. Je veux me donner le plus d'outils possible pour réussir dans ma carrière. So maybe, Lauren, we can go to the Slido questions because I know we're a bit over the time here. I want to make sure we can get as many Slido's questions as possible. There's a lot on there. So again, if you want to ask a question, you go to slido.com. You put in the code ACFO, ACAF. We'll try to, Grant, maybe I'll take a few and you can add on others if you'd like. The first one is it up to me to use the PMA to identify my accomplishments and value added or my employer's job? Isn't this me getting assessed and not me assessing me? Very good point, right? Look, you don't have the obligation to do your own performance assessment, right? You're right. It is your employer's job to do it. However, why would you not take advantage of this opportunity? If I'm being told, hey, Danny, do you want to take a first kick at making your own performances? Absolutely, I do. Heck, I would proactively propose it because you control the narrative. No one knows better than you what you're good at, and hopefully what you need to be improved on. Where's your areas of a bit challenging there? So I'm telling you guys, if you were to tell your boss, if Grant asked me, hey, Danny, do you want to do your take a first kick at your assessment? And I tell Grant, well, that's not my job. What kind of attitude does that show? I'm not saying you don't have a right to say no, but the employer they can ask, right? And if you're saying, you know what, I know you have a lot on your plate right now, I would be happy to take a first kick at it. I'll let you know where I think I find myself, and be honest. You know, if you think I've not given a good representation, you can actually do that afterwards, right? Your interaction with your coworkers and when your boss is so important. So I get why this question is being asked, but I always use that as an opportunity. Grant, anything to add to that, or if not, I'll let you take another one.
No, I mean, I think you've expressed it well there on that point for sure. This is your opportunity here to show initiative, I think, and I would take advantage of it. I'll take the one on calibration exercises there, Danny, because we do see that maybe more and more frequently within departments. And I'm going to try to give a nuanced answer to this one, because to some degree, I think that calibration exercise can be useful for managers to make sure that they're on the same page in terms of standardizing the way that they're evaluating people. You know, it's easy for me to foresee a situation in which you have, you know, a very good-hearted supervisor who was very frequently handing out 4s within their team, and then you had another team where a supervisor was like much more rigid, much more critical, and was handing out a huge number of 2s. And we don't want to have that kind of situation across a whole department in which managers are very inconsistently evaluating performances. So that's one side, I'll say, of that, is that it's not necessarily bad. But what we wouldn't want to see is, as Danny described earlier in our discussion, is you don't want to see a situation in which somebody is just lowered down because they want to maintain whatever bell curve that there is. If somebody is genuinely and can demonstrate that they are a 4, they shouldn't be lowered down simply because there's one extra 4 that they didn't want to have within their group. It shouldn't work like that. So there should be a balance, I'll say, between consistency across groups and a standardized approach, and also addressing the fact that teams are different, groups are different, and people shouldn't be punished based on the fact that maybe they work in a good group. One other point on calibration exercise is, I mean, I think your supervisor should be empowered to make those decisions as well too. So if they really did think that you exceeded expectations and were a succeeded plus or a surpassed, then the department should be empowering them with the ability to make that decision. Similarly, I've seen examples in which somebody had a completely positive performance evaluation. All the comments were positive, and yet as a result of a calibration exercise, they received a 2, simply because that was what the various managers decided within themselves. And that's very unfair to do that to an employee as well too, for all the reasons we talked about earlier, in terms of, people should be aware and given consistent feedback throughout the year, the ability to improve in deficient areas if their manager recognizes that. So I'm not going to give I'm going to give a nuanced opinion to that, because I think there's positive and negatives, and management should be balancing those appropriately. Okay, thanks, Dany.
Thanks, Grant. And I see we got a lot of questions, so I'll try to hash through them quickly here. How does a talent management plan work? Does the employee always need to hit the Succeed Plus mark to keep the plan? No. So friends, keep in mind, there's nothing wrong with a 3. A Succeed there's nothing wrong with that. If you get a Succeed all your life, that's perfect. There's absolutely nothing wrong. You don't absolutely need to have a Succeed Plus to get a talent management plan, right? You can still be on those. It's just easier for management to justify a talent management plan when you have a Succeed Plus. How does it work? Well, all the 4s are basically identified as either ready for promotion or ready for new opportunities or different challenges. And depending on your department, you might get an assignment or different work experience, or there's different ways of doing it. So it's basically you're identified as someone who is potentially ready to go up the food chain or have different challenges because you've shown your ability to perform. Next question. Employees and managers hate the rating scale. Why can't we move to performance rating discussions with no rating? I feel this would be less stressful for all. You're right. I think 10 years ago, this is kind of what we had. Different departments were going about this different ways. I think what TBS is trying to do here is having a consistent rating scale across all departments. Because when you're moving from one department to the next, surpass in one department could just be a succeed in one or the other. Also keep in mind, ACFO wants you to be assessed, right? It's in your collective agreement. We want you guys to give feedback because we want to protect you. If someone says you're not doing a good job, you need to know these things. But also, if you're shining, let's give credit where credit is due. I get it that it is stressful, but I think it's a necessary evil. I saw a question there about what's a definition of between the ratings. At the end of the day, friends, here's how most performance assessments work. Your manager already knows what the conclusion of it will be. And then they reverse engineer it so that you have either a 3 or a 4 or a 2. So that's why it's so important to maintain that soft skills, right? If they think, you know what, obviously Grant should be a 4 here, so let's make it work so that it's a 4. Is there specific descriptions? Yes, absolutely. But there's also a lot of gray areas. So if we stick to the nitty-picky here, it's just have those solve problems, have a positive attitude, and be a team player, and I can assure you the rest will solve itself. Grant, I'll throw it over to you if you want to take another question.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I'll take the next one because it's related. We stay on the same topic there, and it's the one for employees that do the minimum, do their job well, versus employees that do their job very well, but not to the point of succeeded plus. And I think, as Dany touched on there, I mean, I think it's just important to recognize that there is a lot of gray area between these. And we had you had the numbers up there earlier. For how many people got 3s, and it was almost 70%, I think, or over 70%. So I think we have to recognize that there's going to be a lot of area that falls in to those tens of thousands of people that fall into that category, and we shouldn't be too attached really to one number versus another number. Now, If you are in the category of the person who wants to get to the succeeded plus, and that's the context within which you're asking that question, then I think that's as Dany mentioned earlier, that's a conversation to have with your supervisor at the beginning of the year or at any point during the year, is how do I get to that level? What do I need to do? And having that kind of open discussion with your supervisor about getting you there would be like the first step to getting there, I would say. Dany?
Thanks, Grant. Next question. What happens if the performance objectives were not set at the beginning of the year and you are assessed on them at the end of the year, right? I'm pretty sure that for the majority of you, you did not receive your PMA objectives at the beginning of the year, right? So you could here file a complaint. You could say, I'm being assessed on something I didn't know. But if it's a non-issue, friends, let's not make it an issue, right? If you think you're being properly assessed, if you think you should be a 3 and you're getting a 3, fine. If you think you should be a 4, you're getting a 4, fine. And the rule says you should be getting those at the beginning of the year, but you rarely do, right? So if it's an issue for you that, for example, someone says you should have done X, Y, Z, and you didn't because you didn't know, and now you're getting a 2 because of it, of course, that's not fair. That needs to be corrected. You cannot meet expectations you were not aware of. So if that's the case, please contact us at ACFO and we can help you out with that one. Why am I forced to sign my PMA if I don't agree with it and the content of it? I think we've addressed this one. You're only signing that you've received it. You're never signing that you agree with it. So your box is really the one you got to maintain, that one there. So don't worry about the other side. That's I mean, if you don't agree with the content of the employer's box, contact us at ACFO and we can definitely have a conversation with you. We currently have a deadline to complete our PMAs of March 31st. Which is stressful. Do you think this may get extended, or is this specific to our departments? Okay, March 31st is garbage. Okay, this is a departmental self-imposed deadline. I can tell you TBS's real deadline is sometime like in mid-July or something like that. Now, that doesn't mean that if your boss says, can you fill this out by March 31st, that you can say, oh, no, this is a fake deadline. No, when your boss gives you a deadline, what you would need to do is say, hey, I've got a lot on my plate right now. If you want me to make this a priority, I can do that, but there's certain things I won't be able to do, right? This is why your PMA, always have it in your mind. You know what's going to happen. Every year, we know we're going to have a PMA to do. So ask your boss what, if it's a March 31st deadline, just tell them, I'm going to need some time to do this, and I don't have sufficient time. Do you want me to do overtime to do my PMA? Or what do I take off my plate to ensure I have sufficient time to actually do my PMA? So the deadline, they can probably extend, but even if they can, maybe your manager doesn't want to extend it. So have that conversation with your manager. Grant, over to you for the next question you'd like to take.
Yeah, I wanted to take this one on why TBS is purposely limiting the length of the assessed employee's comment box in the PMA application, because I would like to ask whoever had written that question, or anybody else who has found that example, to contact me afterwards to talk about that. There's no limit in the collective agreement in terms of what you can, how much you could put into in a reply in the comment box. Now, I think that's got to be reasonably exercised, because nobody would want to have a situation in which you could have thousands of pages of documents and attachments and that sort of thing. But I don't think that's the situation that we're talking about here with that question. I don't think anybody should be limited in terms of how long they are allowed to reply. And certainly there's no reference to that in the collective agreement. So I would like to address that if somebody can contact me afterwards.
Yeah, I think this one, Grant, is because the system limits you. So when people fill out their PMA, it's an IT software thing, and the box itself probably has a number of words. So if that's the case, you can always have an addendum, right? You could say, because Grant brings up a very good point, nowhere do we limit the number of comments. So you could say, please see the attached addendum regarding the rest of our comments. So maybe there's an IT restriction there, but if you need more space, we can get you more space, that's for sure.
Yeah, please contact me.
Yeah. Can you please explain the difference between Succeed Plus and Surpassed? You can go on TBS's website for that one. There's clear criteria, there's a wording, but again, friends, let's not focus on the wording, focus on adding that value, because as I was saying before, often these are predetermined conclusions, because even if you focus and you go get the definition, right? And you're like, I'm pretty sure I meant on this point, the best way to prove yourself is just add that value, positive attitude, solve problems, help everyone. there's certain jobs that it's probably impossible to get a surpass, right? You saw in the chart, it's less than 2% of people that get a surpass. I think a Succeed Plus is more likely, but a surpass is very difficult to achieve. If an employee has Succeed Plus, how does that talent management is triggered? Can that help towards a non-advertised appointment? Yes. I saw another question on there that said, I've been Succeed Plus for 4 years. I've never been put on a talent management. Have that conversation with your manager. If you're a Succeed Plus or a Surpassed, tell your boss, you know what? I'd like to know if there's a rotational program for people that have a talent management program. I'd like to be, do you think I'm ready for a promotion? Have that conversation, because in certain departments, when you're on a talent management, it will probably lead to a non-advertised promotion. So have that conversation with your manager. That's your starting point, is always your manager. Absolutely. Will ACFO negotiate performance pay based on PMA results? See, I love this, because 10 years ago, if you had a surpass, there was absolutely no difference. This is a slippery slope, friends. What we'd rather have is everyone gets a wage increase, right? What we want to tie it to, though, is, like the other person said, a non-advertised promotion. So you need to incentivize people that are higher performers, right? If I'm being paid to do A, B, C, and I have no incentive to do D, E, F, why would I do D, E, F? What's in it for me? You need to incentivize people. People do what they're incentivized to do. So if you know that you're going to put on a talent management plan, could lead to a promotion, that's definitely something that could be served to have a little carrot there to get that extra motivation. I'll take a couple more here. Does the employee have input into their talent management plan? Yes, absolutely. Your box is yours. So make sure you fill that out. Make sure you give yourself praise. Friends, whenever you're having an argument with your supervisor about your PMA and you feel you're not giving credit, contact us at ACFO. I want to make sure that your PMAs properly reflect the value that you bring. Grant, I'll let you take one, then maybe I'll take another one as well.
I got a question that was actually for you, but I think I'd probably be able to answer this better. Is did the union receive more PMA-related complaints last year during COVID? And this would just be anecdotal. We do keep track of these things. So, but I'd have to look. We'd have to look a while from now, later on, to tabulate the numbers. But my feeling is that there was actually less complaints that came in from the members about the process.
Thanks, Brad.
And sorry, Danny. I wanted to go back also to the collective bargaining question there about somebody asked about could we negotiate performance pay. I mean, I guess it's another invitation for somebody who has collective bargaining related suggestions, that when the time comes, they can bring those forward to the committee. Will be, it does evaluate every proposal that comes in from a member and discuss whether to bring it forward. I think the hesitancy in the past to bring it forward has been that it does benefit some members versus others. It's also the way that was written, it would put the power in the hands of the employer in terms of how much we would get as they could then influence people's rates of pay and hand out less succeeded pluses, for example. So the actual language for how you went forward with that kind of proposal will be pretty important as well.
Thanks, Grant. It's always delicate when it comes to wages, friends. You don't want to put the whole power in the employer's hands, because as Grant pointed out, then they have all say, right? I guarantee you, if surpass leads to a salary bump, we're going to have less and less people that have surpasses. Guaranteed. We'll be given access to the presentation. Yes, absolutely. As I mentioned, by the rest of the week, we're going to post this presentation and the video of this on our website. So stay tuned for that, both English and French decks. How am I able to access public service using hiring process? Yeah, so this is a manager that they want to have access to other people's PMAs. I will tell you this. I don't know the formal way. I don't think there actually is a formal way. It's probably who people that are networking, that are exchanging their PMAs. So this is not something that I believe is yet formalized, but I have seen it done in the past. So again, you got to be careful when you're filling out your PMAs, because you don't know who's going to be seeing it in the future. I don't think you can actually see it formally because the system is locked to the profile. So this is more of a question from a hiring person's standpoint, which we don't represent people who are trying to do this. So you should ask TBS for this.
I think Danny, sorry to interrupt you, but I think same one for the next question there that I wanted to address. An employee's password protecting their files from their supervisor. With this issue should be corrected on the PMA. That strikes me as something that should be dealt with through HR, and I'm sure they can find a way to correct that problem.
Thanks, Grant. Merci. Je vois une question en français finalement. Mon superviseur immédiat FI3 est un intérim FI4. Est un intérim 4 mois de l'FI4 veut se joindre à la discussion sur l'évaluation de rendement. FI4 ne se supervise pas. Est-ce que je peux refuser? Très délicat. Contactez-nous. Je comprends qu'est-ce que vous voulez dire. Tu es un intérim. Là, tu veux évaluer mon rendement, mais tu es comme mon équivalent. Ça dépend. On a besoin d'avoir peu d'informations pour vraiment répondre à celle-ci. Just because we have a lot of questions, Grant, I'll take a couple of more and then we'll end it. What if I have a Succeed Plus for the past 4 years and have not seen or heard a talent management plan yet for my management team? I think I addressed this one before. Have the conversation with your manager. Ask them, do they feel you're ready for a promotion or a lateral move or different challenges? And if they say yes, then you can say, good, does my department have a talent management plan, right? You got to ask because your manager might not be aware of these things. Departments sometimes are massive and your manager might not be aware of what's going on. Not that it's their fault, it's just some departments are so massive. How can we ask for SMART objectives as an employee? The PMA is done by the managers, so they are the ones that set the course direction of the PMA. They do, but it's done in consultation with the employee. So if you're given a PMA that you think is completely out of whack, you've got to voice your concerns. You've got to say, hey, I'm not sure how this will be measured. I'm not sure this is feasible. I'm not sure this accurately reflects what I do as a job to be able to attain these objectives, right? So you voice your concerns as soon as you say it, but be careful how you voice them, right? You don't want to go in guns blazing. You can have a conversation and saying, hey, you know what? I'm not sure this one maybe applies to me that much, or maybe we can word this differently. Grant, any last ones you want to take there?
What is a talent management plan meant to do given budget limitations? Employees still need to compete for competitions. What is the advantage for employee? I mean, talent management plan is a departmental and a government process. It's for them to use to improve the department. It's gonna continue on in good times and in bad. It's managers have to think more, you know, about the future of the department and the federal public service. So if they have an excellent employee, even if a talent management plan is going to help that employee to leave to move to another position, they have to be thinking about the long-term goals of that employee. That should be part of the conversation that goes on. I'm not sure that fairly addresses the question. I mean, none of these things will change going forward. If we are looking at cutbacks going forward, we're still going to be looking at the same sorts of challenges. That we're still going to be looking at 2s, 3s, and 4s, and talent management plans and action plans.
Grant, and I'll take the next one here. Succeed Plus includes definition, consistently generates strong results above those required. If I do others task backfilling, does this equate to Succeed Plus? This is a great question. I want to put emphasis on this. There's a difference between a workload versus a performance, right? So if you're backfilling for other people and we've, I don't know, increased your workload by 30%, okay, well, you've basically increased your output and you haven't been, like I'm saying, compensated for that. So you need to have that dialogue with your manager saying, hey, I'm happy to be a team player and take on this extra duty, but I think now my output's going to be much greater, more stress. I'm hoping that maybe it's going to be reflected in my PMA, right? So have that constant conversation with your manager. And lastly, I want to take a question I saw in French, parce que je sais que les questions en français, ils se font pas monter souvent. Qu'est-ce qui arrive si ton gestionnaire utilise le PMA pour te punir? Comment se défendre? Okay. L'évaluation de rendement ne devrait pas être un outil de discipline. Okay? C'est un évaluement d'évaluation. Donc, on peut vous dire, voici les éléments qu'on aimerait que vous amélioriez, mais ça mène à une lettre disciplinaire. Ça, c'est pas normal, c'est pas correct. Contactez-nous pour qu'on puisse vous assurer que si on vous attaque ou si on vous dit, écoute, il y a 30 choses qu'il faut que tu améliores, c'est impossible à faire. Là. Donc, s'il vous plaît, communiquez avec nous si vous sentez comme si votre gestionnaire vous attaque à travers l'évaluation de rendement. Friends, on that, we got to call it short here because we've gone over our 1 hour, but I hope we've answered the majority of your questions. There was a great dialogue here today, and I can see this is a very hot topic. So for those of you that we haven't had a chance to address your questions, because this is anonymous, we can't actually get back to you. So please send us an email. If you have questions on your PMAs, you can reach us at our labor relations inbox. So this webcast is going to be on our website with the decks, both English and French, and an email address to reach out to us if you have any questions. PMAs are here to stay, my friends, but instead of seeing them as a paper exercise, it's kind of a nuisance, I want you to see them as an opportunity to help you shine. Grant, thank you very much for being here today, my friend. You can reach out to our labor relations advisors on this topic or any other topic. Until then, friends, we'll see you soon. Stay safe. Bye-bye.